You ready to go, guys?
Yep.
Okay. So thank you for talking with us,
You're
George.
welcome.
So one of the things that I was wondering about, is really about the history of your work in the neighborhood. So you started here in the South Side. Tell us about when you first got into that building, which we know was a dairy before or a processing center.
You're talking the main building.
Yeah, the whole complex down
Yeah.
there. You started on Nelson Street first.
Well, I don't know. I think it was the late 40s because my dad started in 39 and then he worked with Augie Duesenberg, the Duesenberg car guy, in his machine shop for a while. And then he moved it out to a building in Massachusetts Avenue. And sometime in the late 40s is when we moved to Nelson Street. And Nelson Street, if you notice the building, the small bricks on one half, then the block on the east half, it was only that one small building at that time. Since then, we added on the east side of the building, all that I built. And that was in 1960, 61. So all that was put on after my dad left. And we didn't get, then we bought the building on the corner, the Darko Dry Cleaners building, a building to store their vehicles in, because at that time they used to have pickups on dry cleaning. So we had those two buildings plus the main building. And then we bought the tube building in, I think, 1995 or 6. And before that had been, we still do call it the Nut House, because Richard Green roasted nuts in that building. And when we bought the building, we had to put $300,000 in renovations to the building. It was in that bad a shape. We found dead raccoons in the building. I mean, I'll never eat another roasted peanut again. And there was rancid oil in that, and it was just horrible. And we had to just destroy the whole interior of it and rebuild it. So, and it's a great building. I mean, we really put a lot of money into it. What happened, we had developed an FAA repair station to repair parts for the airlines when they take their engines off for maintenance. And they examine all the parts. A lot of the parts that we made for the OEM, GE and Pratt & Whitney, would be damaged, and the airlines would throw them away. Well, we got a license from the FAA to repair those parts. So we went around to all the airlines to say, don't throw these parts away, we can repair them for you at half the cost of a new part. And we did. And so that's how that building got started. Now the volume was very low because instead of batching parts for the OEM, you are getting one or two or three pieces at a time in from the airlines. And the turnaround time was quite important because if the airline took an engine off the wing, it could only stay off for so long. And if it stayed off for too long, they just buy a spare part and forget about the repair. So that's how we got into the repair business. And so at first the airlines said, well, these tubular assemblies are so cheap that we don't want to mess with them. Well, we don't buy any repairs. But our engineers finally got down into the maintenance centers of the airlines. I think Northwest was the first one. And once you got down and talked to the mechanics, you found out that there were tubs of these parts sitting in a corner that they were going to throw them all away. And that was thousands of dollars. We saved Northwest $1 million the first year we were in business because we have a catalog of the OEM's spare parts prices, and we could see what the airline had to pay for a spare part, and we could compare it with what we could save it for. And if we could save it for 60% of the catalog price and turn it around within 30 days, it was kind of a no-brainer for the airline. So that's how we got into that business.
That's great. And so you were repurposing these parts instead of just having them get thrown
And
away.
to tell you the truth, once we refinished them, they were as good as new. They were as good as new, and our people, we have and we still we still have a repair station here. But that was the big repair station. It was for the tubular assemblies.
And that was in the front building that we're in now.
And then we moved that into where you're at. Mm-hmm.
So in the back building, that was where that was where the main office, like your office now, where your desk was, and
Nelson Street.
And that was upstairs in
Yes.
Nelson Street.
And that upstairs wasn't there when I went to work. That was all added. It was over on the west side of the building is where the office was. And after my dad left, then we expanded eastwards. And where the parking lot is, they were all houses in there. We had a very small parking lot. But in the back part, there were houses. And we eventually just bought one house at a time and tore them down. And my office was in a house at that time, one time, because it was attached. It was right next door to the building. And so I just put a little walkway and sat in the upstairs of that house.
When we were going through the building, we found some things that were notes from you to the employees, philosophy, and I also had heard from Alan Graymore, who we've been working with, about your kind of open office policy, which seems like it's kind of a thing nowadays, but you kind of always had that.
I've never had a private office, no, and I've never had a secretary. I just used one of the salespeople's, at that time, before computers, of course. And salespeople had a secretary, so I just, when anything I wanted typed or anything, I just had them do it. So no, I've never had a secretary or an office.
Why did you approach it that way?
I didn't know any better. And I had no experience. I graduated from Purdue in '59, and then 2 years later, and I went to law school nights for 2 years, and by default, I took the company over because my dad wanted to stay in Florida, and the guy he had running it got sick, and so I became the default manager, and that's all that's ever been said to this day as far as I gave myself my first raise.
How old were you when you took over?
22.
Wow.
Well, 23. Had one child.
And then where were you guys living back then? Were you down here or were you?
No, we've always lived on the north side. I lived in a development. Well, actually, I started out in the Meadows when that was a kind of a nice apartment building to live in. And then a year later, we had a child, and then we moved to 71st Street and Hague Road. There was a development out there that we bought a house, and then 6 years later, we bought our current home. We've lived there 50 years.
Wow. And the south side, though, has been your other neighborhood. So
yeah, pretty much. But it was always around Garfield Park. I mean, I knew how to get from my house, and this is before the interstates, I knew how to get from my house to Tube, but I didn't. But south of that, I had no knowledge of that part of Indianapolis, even though that's where most of our employees came from.
What did you think about, and then you got involved with the Friends of Garfield Park. Tell us a little bit about why, you're working down here, but what else about this area really connected with you?
Well, I knew Andy Holt, who owned the Fireside. And Andy asked me to have lunch with him one day. And at that time, Mark Bowell was a part of the Parks, Federation or
Parks Board.
Parks Board. And that's where I met Mark. And they were going to have a concert with Chuck Maggione to come to Garfield Park, and they needed sponsors. And I thought, well, we've got so many employees down here on the south side that it would be kind of a natural thing for us to sponsor that. And then I met P.E. McAllister, and P.E. was quite involved with the park, and I really admired, I still do admire him. And so we got involved with the parks. And then we started to have then what happened was CICF and Lilly Foundation had put so much money into restoring Garfield Park. And then we found out, and so we started to have some meetings with Linda Borello about how we could help with the park, because they'd spent all this money on the sunken gardens and put no money aside to maintain them. I mean, it was just, and we found out it was going to take several $100,000 a year just to maintain the plantings and rotate them seasonally. And the Parks Department didn't have any idea how to do that or where it was coming from. So we decided, well, we had to start raising some money for the parks somehow. So we had, you know how it goes, we had meeting after meeting after meeting, and talked about it. So finally, I said, we have to do something. So I said, we need to form a board of directors. I'd been on several boards before, but I'd never formed a board of directors. They were all already established, and I'd just walk in and be a part of it. And so I said, I'll tell you what, I'll hire a development director for the park and put him on my payroll. He or she will spend their full time working for Garfield Park. So I hired a girl. She'd been a development person at the Indianapolis Zoo. Shelley Mitchell was her name. So I hired her full time, put her on to Processing's payroll. We set a desk up in the conservatory for her with computer and everything. And she started helping Linda. Linda didn't even know how to make a budget for the park to give to the Parks Department every year. So she worked with Linda to try to help her make a budget every year for the Parks Department. And then we got other people to join, and we said we're going to form a board of directors. So then Shelley knew a guy, and I can't remember his name, at the IUPUI School of Philanthropy. So we got him to come in and do retreats with us, and the whole strategic planning thing. And he helped, Jeremy was his first name, and he helped us develop a formal board of directors. And it was a learning experience for all of us, because I'd been on boards, so I knew how they operated, but nobody else had ever been on a board before. And so we got it going that way. So then Shelley would help us. She ran the whole show. So her husband was a forester, and he got a job in the East to manage a number of the resources areas. So she had to move. So Mark Bowell said, and he was on our board, he said, I'd like to take that job. And so we said, that's great, because he's a very resourceful person. So Mark left the board, came on as the development director, and we went out and started raising money. And I think I'm not active on the board, but I'm a board member. I think right now we have over $1.2 million in our endowment to support Garfield Park. And we got a friend of mine who's an attorney, got him on board. We got a letter of memorandum with the Parks Foundation that it's our money. We can direct where it goes. The Parks Department can't take it over, at a whim. And part of it's at CICF, another part of it is in property. So that's how we got going. And right now it's a very active board. They've got, most of the people we got started with, and this is like 1990 something, they're all, a lot of them, several have died and several have left the board. So it's pretty much an all new board now, and now Linda Borello has become the chairman.
And then before the work came from Lilly Endowment and CICF, and then you guys came on as the Friends, what was the park like?
It was terrible. It was all run down. All the fountains, of course, didn't work. Everything was crumbly and falling. All the cement urns were falling apart. It was really pretty bad. And it wasn't anything to be proud of, that's for sure. And CICF and Lilly really, I think Lilly put over $10 million into it to restore it. And it was really, They did the pavilion, then they did the sunken gardens. Then we found out when we started raising money that the greenhouse was falling down because the aluminum struts had been set into concrete and they were all eroding, and the whole conservatory was starting to lean. So a lot of the money we raised had to go for those kinds of things into the original intent, which was to support the sunken gardens. The original intent was just to support the sunken gardens. And then now it's expanded to the entire park, pretty much.
And then the neighborhood, the time, so you were here mostly, so you sort of saw a transition in the neighborhood. St. Catherine's used to be down there. Some of the things that have, it sort of changed in that direction, and now I feel like there's some more momentum on the south side with Fountain Square.
That's what I think. What stimulated it was the development of Fountain Square. That really has stimulated the south side, and now it's just coming south, and it's just kind of a natural evolvement of the progress.
And for us, it was really interesting when we met Alan down there. We were looking for a place to move to, and we ran into Alan, and we felt really fortunate that you guys have a connection to the arts. Your art center board membership, and then your wife's store is an art-oriented place, and we're friends with some of the people that work there, and Justin Cooper is a friend of ours.
And he works with my wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how has your connection to art been through the years too, in addition to the south side?
Through my wife, actually. My wife was in fine arts at IU, and she dropped out after her third year to get married, and she always intended to go back. Well, we ended up with 5 children, but so she didn't go back until the 5th one went into grade school, and she felt she could go back, and I don't remember the details, but she couldn't go to Heron because of its connection with IU some way. They changed the curriculum by that time. 20 years had gone by. And so she ended up going to IUPI and got a degree in English literature. So then, with her art background, she began writing for Arts Indiana with Ann Stack, which owned it at that time and supported it. So she became one of the review people for art exhibitions around the state for Arts Indiana until it went out of business. In the meantime, my daughter went to Heron, and my son-in-law, her husband, went to Heron and graduated. So my wife and daughter were thinking about setting up a business, not to support artists so much, but to have unusual type of art. So we go to New York twice a year to the art show at the Javits Center, and we look at all the new handcrafted arts material that comes every year. So she started out with that, and she started in a house in Broadway. She rented a house, and then when the Sitzmark, which is what that building is, the bungalow was, when it came up for sale, my wife said, it's for sale. The guy that leased it from the Sitzmark had the right of first refusal. Well, he exercised his right, and then he found out there was an environmental problem because where the parking lot is now used to be a filling station. So the tanks underground at that filling station. So he refused, and it went back up for sale. I bought it the same day. Called Tucker and said, we'll buy it, and didn't haggle or anything. And we bought it that day. And so then we had to remediate the parking lot, which took about a year and a half, 2 years. They had to drill holes and vent and all that. But in the meantime, we renovated, Bill O'Connor company came in and renovated the bungalow for us. And so my wife got started in that. So It's kind of grown. It's done better every year. So last year was a good year for us. Now my daughter is very involved. It's almost her full-time job. So that makes it really nice for us.
How many of your kids work with you guys between the two businesses, between this one and that one?
Well, that one, just one daughter. Then I have a son who lives in Colorado. He's a builder. And then I have 3 children here. My daughter runs this division, Aerofab. The other daughter who you just met, she's in our purchasing department, but she's leaving in June to be an at-home mom. And then my son, who you met also, he's been here for 15 or 20 years. My daughter's been here 29 years. So
Wow.
she knows all the ins and outs.
So how do you feel about that, having and you went to work in the company when you were a younger person too.
22. Yeah.
So how do you feel about that? It seems like says something really good about your family.
That's what keeps me here, really. I've been here 57 years running this place. So it's kind of I don't work full time. I work half days, but I work here every day. And, but if it weren't for the children being here, I probably would have sold it a long time ago.
Yeah.
But it's exciting, to tell you the truth, it's an exciting business. This division particularly we make parts here for fighter engines. We've got the new B-12 bomber that's coming up. We've got parts on that engine. I mean, really, really complicated stuff. $100,000 a piece, $200,000 a piece. We're in the tube business, which we sold to Pratt and Whitney. It was like, highest price on anything was like $15,000, but most of it was in $2,000 or $3,000 a piece, and some in hundreds. So this is a different business, much more complicated.
What do you, going back to the art topic, what do you think about the idea of the buildings down there? Because we're working on the big building too on
Yeah,
Nelson
I understand.
Street. What do you think about the idea of artists working? I mean, now the basement of the Cruft Street building is our workshop. And then the other building, our plan is to have studios and other kinds of more art-oriented manufacturing kind of stuff happening in there. What do you think about that how does that make you feel that those buildings are being used in this way?
Oh, that's great. It's wonderful because that building has sat vacant for a long time, the main building. And, there's, things have to be done, but we tried to keep it up when we were there. It was kind of hard. But no, that's wonderful. In fact, at the Art Center, I got involved at the Indianapolis Art Center in about 1974. My wife started taking, it was the Art League then. My wife started taking classes, and at that time they were down on Pennsylvania Avenue in a house, and there's where she met Joyce Summers. So she and Joyce took classes for quite a long time together, and then they started the Art Center. And then Alan Clues got involved and sponsored the addition on the Art Center, I think in 1976 or something like that. And then Joyce came to me one day, and we'd socialized with the Summers and people at the Art Center, and came to me and asked me if I'd put money towards a deck out on the river that they wanted to put out there. And so, sure, I said, we'll do that. And so we got started that way. And then she asked me on the board, of course, after I gave money. And then the Art Center started to grow. And Joyce was a very forward-looking person. When she decided to go out and build a new building, and a Michael Graves building particularly, a lot of the board members quit. They liked the clubby atmosphere of the Art League, and they didn't want to share it with people. It was their social organization. They wanted to keep it that way. So a lot of them, several left, and some stayed on. So somehow or another, Stan Hurt and I became chairman of the development committee to go out and raise, at that time was $5 million. So we were co-chairman of that. And so we went out and started raising money. Of course, Joyce was with us most of the time, and she was a tremendous asset. And so, well, we did an assessment. Some firm in Cincinnati came to give us an assessment of whether we could raise the money or not. And they ended up saying you can't raise that much money. Most of you'll raise $1 or $2 million. You're not known in the area. People don't know who you are, and they're not going to give money to people they don't know. Well, fortunately, Lilly Foundation stepped in, and so did CICF. So we got those on board, and then other people started coming forward. Stan's family donated, my family donated, and so we got going that way, and we raised the money, and so we built the building. Well, then, years later, Joyce wanted to put an arts park in. Now it's going to take another $5 or $6 million. So I became chairman with Ralph Nowak, who was at that time First Indiana. So we went out and we ended up raising the money for that. But my experience from Garfield Park told me we had to have a maintenance fund. If we're going to put a arts park in, it has to be flowers and you have to provide for maintenance. So we made a condition that 20% of everything we raised went into a maintenance fund to maintain the park. And so that worked out very well. And then Frank Basile came in. So I met Frank at the dedication of the first part of the building. They had a tent outside, and they had John Mutt sat on one side of me, Frank Basile on the other. And we had a torrential rain, and there was a river just going down through the middle of the tent. And I looked at Frank and said, I know you don't, because I read his articles in the IBJ. So we got to talking. And he was or still is, a motivational speaker, you know. So he got talking, and you know, you think, some of these motivational speakers, you don't know whether they're real or not. You know, they know what to say, but are they just talking or not? But I thought Frank was really a very sincere person. So I told Joyce, I said, Joyce, and she'd known him, we need to get him on the board. She said, oh, do you think so? And I said, yeah, I really do. So Frank came on the board, and he really added a lot to the board. And Frank just doesn't talk. Frank really follows through on what he says. I mean, he's a very sincere person. So we started, Frank wasn't, well, he was in between wives at that time. So anyway, we started going to the Janus Ball together at Heron. And so we got involved with Heron. And so then Valerie Eichmeyer called me and asked if I'd be on the advisory board at Heron. And Frank was already on it. Well, the funny thing was, when Valerie was trying to raise money for the new Heron building, I said, you have to meet Frank Basile. So I called Frank and I said, would you have lunch with Valerie Eichmeyer and myself? He says, I will, but if you're after money, I'm not going to give it. Well, so we had lunch, and then, of course, Frank became one of the biggest contributors to Heron of anybody that they had. So we go back a long way, too. So, and now I'm still on the board at Heron. And more than half the board was the old Art Center board. So now all that has transferred to Heron, and Heron's expanding very rapidly. And, you know, with the ceramic studio, we sponsored all of that. And Frank's a big part of that. And, of course, the Eskenazis. And so it's really been quite an amazing venture of how this whole thing has kind of evolved and grown. And now the intertwining of IMA, Idle George, these people, the boards are all made up of pretty much the same group of people. And so there's a lot of sharing going on, which Joyce was always a proponent of. She always wanted to do that, and now it's coming about. Joyce is on the board at Heron now, so we've got that connection. Frank Basile's there, John Hoover. So all the old board at the Art Center is now at Heron.
You know, in a way, like you've always made a difference with your having your business located here. How do you feel the art can make a difference?
Art is classy. I mean, it just changes the whole atmosphere of the neighborhood. Broad Ripple's bars. You know, it's pretty much bar to bar in a lot of Broad Ripple. And I think it detracts from the neighborhood. My wife is adamant about these bars going in every time a building gets vacant. You don't have that kind of a scene in Fountain Square. You really have a mix of food and entertainment, and not just a bar scene. And I've never been there at night, so I don't know. But during the day, I mean, Fountain Square is a really nice place to walk around in, and it's much more open than Broad Ripple. Broad Ripple's just wall-to-wall buildings, and you don't get that same feeling. And whoever I met him, the man is who renovated the theater. I mean, I think a lot of credit goes to him because he was the first one to really step in that I know in Fountain Square and really make a difference and upgrade that building. And it's just beautiful, and it's kind of a landmark. And it just seemed like that's how it got started, and it went on from there.
How do you see that as being a part of the mix down here with us moving in and with the other things that are going on here?
Well, if we get rid of that mission, it'll help a lot. But I think the same thing can happen here. When I came here, that was a Southern Avenue and Shelby was a very nice corner. The store on the corner was a drugstore. A very nice drugstore. It had a fountain there, hamburger. I used to go there and eat hamburgers every day. Where the mission used to be a nice cafeteria. And so you had that there. The Garfield Tavern was, like the Garfield Tavern. And the stores were all nice and kept up nice. I know the guy that owned the cafeteria at that time, this is back in the 50s, he also was a big sponsor of a Sarah Shank golf course. And my father donated all the lockers in that golf course at that time. And then the barber shop was still there. I used to get my hair cut there. But it was a really nice corner, and not like it is today. And I think all that can, come back. You just walk around Chicago and see a corner 10 years ago and a corner today, and it's just like night and day, and they're doing the same thing. It's just remarkable.
That's great. In terms of Big Car, and I've been mostly working with Steve and Dan on this whole process, but you've kind of been keeping up with all this stuff. What have you thought about us and kind of learning about us and moving into the neighborhood and, over the last couple of years of these kind of conversations?
Well, to tell you the truth, I'd never heard of Big Car but then I started asking around, and a lot of people know about Big Car. It seemed like I was the only one, and it seems like it was a different name for an arts organization, so it was kind of strange. And no, but Garfield Park is a really a nice park. It's a low income park. That's the problem. There's not people with money around here that can support Garfield Park. We got involved with St. Francis. St. Francis became a big contributor to the development a part of Garfield Park. And Mark's been able to go out and do a pretty good job of soliciting money. And now it's kind of sustainable. I mean, what he's developed are sustaining members of Garfield Park. So that really helps a lot. And I think getting your involvement in will do the same thing for the community. But it's a poor community, it takes a lot of support. And we, course, the houses you've got over there, we kind of inherited those when we bought properties. And some of the houses we bought just as a favor to the person that owned them. And I think the idea of having residences there for artists is good. At the Art Center, on College, that apartment building at 67th Street, we've always been in negotiations with that guy. What was his name? Shapiro or something like that. About buying that when he retires and putting artist residence in. And that was one of Joyce's dreams back then. We bought the nursery from Loretta, whatever. Anyway, we bought the nursery. We were going to update the nursery to put the glass factory in the basement of that and move things over, so we enlarged the working space of the Art Center. But then we could never raise the money to do that. We made several presentations to do it, and we just couldn't do it. You tap people so much. And it seems like in the art community, there's only so many people, and you kind of go around and around and around. Every time you get a phone call from one of these people, they're going to ask you for money. It's just, it's just really something.
Sure. Well, yeah, we're really excited to be down here, and we really appreciate this. Did you guys have anything else?
It's a great neighborhood.
I'm about knocking you over, huh?
It's a great neighborhood, and Jim Simmons, of course. And Jim's in the neighborhood now, and I think he really adds a lot to it. And I think the board they're developing over at Garfield Park are more affluent than people at the start were. They were very loyal people, but they didn't have any money. They had worked as volunteers and gave that kind of a contribution, which was great. But as far as financially supporting it, they just weren't able to. But now I think they're starting to develop a board that's... Art Center started the same way. And that's what people got upset about, was you're just bringing people in for their money. Well, how else are you going to grow a place? And the only way a person is going to give money is if they're involved. I mean, you can't go out and ask somebody to give money. They don't know who you're talking about, and they want you to give they'll give you $100. But, you're not talking about just $100. So the only way to do it is to get people on the board, get them involved, know what you're doing, have them be a part of it, and then they're going to start giving you money.
Can you tell me, there was something I brought up earlier, but I wanted to, some of these philosophies that you've had for business with your staff and your workers, you remember those? There were things that were posted around. Do you remember some of those, or do you still?
Well, I remember some, but it was all intuitive. It wasn't, and sometimes the customers, we had good customers that demanded a lot from us. And that makes a lot of difference. When you've got a customer that demands a lot, you're going to step up to meet his demands. And we started out with the GEs, Pratt & Whitneys, all the big boys, and they developed us. When in 2000 we formed a partnership with Pratt & Whitney to put in a repair, to expand our repair station that we already had. So that's why the building became vacant on Nelson Street. They took that entire contents of that building, 180 of my employees, and moved them on Kentucky Avenue. They leased a brand new building over there, renovated it, top of the line. I had like 750 pieces of equipment in that Nelson Street building. They took all that, they took 180 employees, and they started a new venture called IAT, International Aerospace Tubes. I owned 49%, and they owned 51%. They wanted to buy it, and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. But 49% of something doesn't really mean a whole lot. So they brought their own people in to run it, of course. I'm on the board of directors. The intent had been, and we had been negotiating with Singapore Airlines to put a shop in Singapore. And I had hired a retired Pratt Whitney man who'd had a shop in Malaysia. And he ran it in Kuala Lumpur. And we hired him to be a consultant to us. And he started negotiating with us people in Singapore. And they were very open to the idea of joint ventures. They have a lot of joint ventures over there. So we told them about our repair station and what we did, and they got very interested. And we were going to do this, just the two of us. And then we decided, well, it would really help to have an OEM involved. It's their product we're overhauling, and maybe they'd be interested. And I knew Pratt & Whitney was fishing around to get in this business. They just didn't know how to do it. So we went to Pratt & Whitney. In fact, the new Pratt & Whitney president was part of it, Bob Ledoux. He just came in January, came back. And we gave a presentation to them, and they got really involved. So then they said, well, why don't we start the joint venture in Indianapolis, and then that joint venture will start a joint venture in Singapore. So that made sense. So we started here in Indianapolis. I was going to be a partner in Singapore, but at that time I didn't have the money to go into it. But they put me on the board of directors in Singapore. So we brought a lot of the people, the Chinese from Singapore, in here and taught them the business for months. And they went back. We'd have quarterly meetings in Singapore. And they became very successful. They're very conscientious people, nice people. They're like 90% Chinese and the rest are Malays. But they really caught on very quickly. And it became so successful that then in 2008, they said, we're going to move the whole thing to Singapore. So we cashed out. They took all these equipment, moved it all to Singapore. I don't think any of the people went. So they had all new, it's a mess over there now. In fact, they want to sell it again. But in the meantime, between 2000 and 2008, Pratt & Whitney implemented all these standards of excellence, charts, different levels. You went from silver to gold to platinum, and they had like 20 measurements. IAT here became the first one to get certified gold in the whole Pratt & Whitney organization. So we learned all that. So when they went and moved, I hired these people back. So 30 of those people, the management people, all are here now. And so they've all been indoctrinated into this way of doing business. So again, it's customer driven. They're driving you. And they do this at the sake of profits. I mean, I was always in business, you made money and that's how you measured how you're doing. They don't do it that way. It was really very strange to me because I was interested in their profitability. And here they're writing stuff off and taking losses and, anyway. But the people caught on to it, my people did, and they brought all that whole philosophy over here now. So you mention something and they're right on top of it, and in the long run, it really made a lot of difference to us.
What would you say is your, like, maybe in a sentence or two, your philosophy on business and how does that connect with your community work too?
My philosophy is not about just money. It's about making enough money to stay in business and then doing a lot of things for the community. We support a lot of have. Right now we have a cash flow problem, but we have supported a lot of organizations. Easter Seals Crossroads, I was chairman of the board there. We support Easter Seals Concord Center. We just started sponsoring it in the last 2 or 3 years because I didn't really know what it was about, and somebody finally they wanted to fix up their bus, so we gave them some money, and then we kind of got into it a little bit more. But Heron, Storytelling of Indiana. We're a big, Ellen Munns is a friend of mine, and we're a big supporter of that. So that's how we kind of get into these things. It's by reference, and Frank Basile got me into storytelling. So it's kind of been very interesting for me to do that. Those tubes, you know the green building across the creek?
Yeah.
That used to be right next to the building. And that's where we had to we had to buy a bender to bend these tubes. The bender was so big that we had to put it in a separate building, and that's where we bent all these tubes. You want some of these, or I don't more than enough. That's more.
You never put the year on photos.
I know it.
You think this is probably 40s?
Yeah.
That
Yes.
kind of looks like it from the
Yeah.
pictures.
Now this is, I'm at work now. This is our first vacuum furnace. And this, this guy became our first, he had been one of our engineers, and he had left and gone to Honeycomb Products. And then, when I bought the vacuum furnace, he came back. And this is still in your, this is right by the shipping entrance. Shipping's here. And this is the first thing you see.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And then-
that's the big, yeah, the big open space in there.
Yeah. And then we had to clear all that bending stuff out. See, that's where all those benders were.
Uh-huh.
But then he started exotic metal treating over on the, off the interstate.
Mm-hmm.
X-ray. These are all our first hot form titanium parts. We form all this sheet metal has to be formed hot. We form it 1300 degrees. It'll break if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Tool room. This is down. This is down towards the street,
Okay.
Nelson Street. That's on Nelson Street.
Yep.
More of the same. These are our first hot presses. I was there with all this.
How many people did you have working at the highest point, or are you there now?
No, this is all gone.
Right. I mean, when you were, I mean,
Oh.
in terms of total in the
We
company.
had about 600.
Okay.
We're down to 500 now because of the economy.
Yeah. Still, 500 is great for.
These are heat. This is a heat exchanger that went on a Martin Marietta airplane. We developed that. That is something. And this is before my time. Here's our first brochure. There's finally a picture of the building. There's the original building.
Okay. Yeah, that's the creek goes right
Yeah.
through here.
Mhm. Yeah, the creek goes down
Underneath.
the street and around.
Was that always like that, or
Yeah.
did they come and do that later?
Uh-uh.
It's just weird that it.
I know it.
Because it goes back out that way,
Yeah,
and it goes all the way straight out east to be past
Right.
Beach Grove, right?
right.
It's I don't know why it turns like that. It's really unusual.
People, the ditch is big enough for people to go in.
Mm-hmm. Under here,
Yeah.
this is a really cool book. Oh, there's some more of the offices up here.
Yeah.
And that's all still up there in the
Yeah.
upstairs, that tile floor.
My first management team.
So did these guys all, I mean, tough for you being 22 and coming and being in charge, or
Well, to
did
tell you-
everybody handle it pretty well?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. I never had a problem. The only problem I had was with some of the factory people. And, but the rest of them I never had a problem.
That's good.
There's an article. Now, this is after we put the addition on, but some Hoosier purchaser wrote an article about us. That manifold went on the Beaumark missile. And it was probably we were making it when I came to work. That was probably the most expensive part at that time we had ever made. And you see, these are all nozzle holes. And we had one left over, which we kept, and it disappeared. It was years, I didn't even notice it. And I said, whatever happened to that part? And they said, oh, Woody Cheeks got it as a lawn sprinkler. So he made a lawn sprinkler out of it.
Out of how much do you think that part costs?
Oh, that part would be thousands and thousands of dollars today.
Yeah, especially
I don't
with
know.
inflation, right? So that building used to be just kind of skinny, and it went
Well,
back in, and you filled in all that, right? Because
Yeah.
this is looking down Nelson.
Yeah,
So then that's all built. That was the newer part you built on.
this here, all the big block.
Uh-huh.
But see, down there's the original.
Right. That was right by the creek.
Yeah,
And that's where Alan or someone showed us that the poles were originally the cows were tied up in there, and you could see.
Oh,
that it
really?
was-
I didn't know
yeah,
that.
that was
Okay.
the barn.
Okay.
Yes, when it was first
Yeah.
the dairy. That's down in the lower part.
there's an article. Here's our second brochure.
Nice. This logo, I've always liked this logo.
I do too.
That's been around a while.
Yeah,
Huh?
Governor Hadley had a advertising firm, and his firm did that.
Kurt, what's the best way to incorporate this stuff into?
You can take this all and do what you want with it.
You wanna do that and we bring it
send
back to
when
it?
you want. Sure. There's the office upstairs,
Oh yeah.
and I think this is our data process, our first punch card system.
Wow. It was pretty bright up there too with all
Oh
the
yeah,
windows.
it was a nice office.
Yeah.
There's another one. Yeah. See, it was nice.
Yeah.
Oh, and here's that big bender I told you about.
Oh yeah. Wow. So I was just watching something about a hydraulic bender. I don't know who had it. But somebody was showing, it goes in there and then that thing just coils
Yeah.
around it, right?
We still have it.
Wow.
We still have, we've got more now. When you go into CTP,
Uh-huh.
that's what they do.
That's down there by UIndy, right?
Yep. We bought this company, and you can see, he was our biggest vendor on little fittings we made. He stole all our graphics. See? And we ended up buying him. Yeah, but that's him. Jim Montgomery.
That's cool. Yeah, back then you kind of had to find graphics where you could. They weren't around everywhere.
Yeah, here's this one.
These annual reports are really good. One of the things that was funny that we found in the building, there was that building was built in phases too. You know, there's all kinds of
Oh, yeah.
interesting
I built
brick
all the
parts
additions.
inside of it.
Yeah.
The little one.
Oh, the little one?
It's
What
the
was?
same deal too, and there's interior walls that were exterior walls that were brick,
Oh.
and there are windows in there. So the one window, and this would have been before it was your workers, the one window had been boarded up on the inside, and so we popped that out of there, and right inside was a can of PBR that someone had stashed in there, a pull tab one, so it would have been from the 70s probably. You know, they were just working and stashed their beer can in there. But we found some interesting stuff in there when we were taking it apart.
We had a janitor. His name was Reuben Bragg. and he was an alcoholic. Of course, he kept a bottle in his push cart. One year I got a bottle of Crown Royal to give to a customer. I put it in my desk drawer. The customer never showed up.
Yeah.
I forgot about it. About a year later, I opened that desk drawer, and there the bottle was. I opened it, it was empty.
You knew who did that.